This episode is brought to you by TikTok for Business. Are you ready to rizz up your brand? Well, you're in luck. TikTok is where discovery drives outcomes, and 3 in 4 users say they will buy from a brand they've seen on TikTok's platform. You can learn more at tiktok.com/business.
The pharmacies don't have a lot of negotiating leverage, and PBMs kind of present to them like these take it or leave it contracts. And if the pharmacies leave them, they could lose out on customers to another pharmacy where PBMs have, more favorable contracts in place.
Hey gang, it's Thursday, October 31st. Rajiv, Blake, and listeners, happiest of Halloweens, and welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily eMarketer podcast made possible by TikTok. I'm Marcus, today I'm joined by 2 folks, both senior analysts. The first one covers digital health for us and is based in New Jersey. It's Rajiv Leventhal.
Hey Marcus, thanks for having me.
Hey fella, of course. Thank you for being here. We're also joined by one of our senior analysts who covers the retail side of things. He's based across the water in New York City. His name is Blake Drosh.
Hey Marcus, good to be here.
Hey fella. We start with the fact of the day. And in the spirit of the World Series, I've got one that's baseball themed. Not remembering until the very start of the show that it was Halloween as well, which probably would have been more appropriate. But here we find ourselves. How did the first pitch become baseball's opening day tradition? So, Blake, I know you love baseball. Rajiv, I'm not sure about you.
I do.
More basketball. Oh, baseball too. Okay.
Yeah.
I know you're a fan of basketball, but okay. So great. So this is for both of you. So Amy McKeever of National Geographic explains that one of the earliest recorded instances of someone throwing a first pitch was in 1892 when William McKinley, then governor of Ohio and a future US president, threw a pitch at a minor league baseball season opener. But credit for transforming the first pitch into a true baseball tradition generally goes to President William Howard Taft on April 14th, my brother's birthday actually, 1910. That's not the year he was born. When the Washington Nationals played the Philadelphia Athletics in their first game of the season. Nationals manager Jimmy McAleer came up with the idea for Taft to start the game that day, according to a biography of pitcher Walter Johnson, and he made history that day by becoming the first sitting US president to throw out the ceremonial first pitch on opening day, a tradition that is being carried on by every US president except a handful, and also by celebrities and other notable folks.
Including 50 Cent, who threw out probably the worst opening pitch of all time at a Mets game a few years ago. Look it up.
There's so many celebrities and non-celebrities now that are like tapped for these first pitches, and so many of them are terrible.
Although, in their defense, at least they got out of their seat and went to the mound to throw it. Taft just stood up from his front row seat in the stadium and threw it from there. Amazing.
I respect that.
Yeah. Anyway, today's real topic is this: the end of convenience. So, this was a suggestion from Stuart, who runs the team, this topic, and a good one at that. We're talking about convenience and kind of a redefinition of the very concept. And it was based on an article written by Emily Stewart, a really great article by her. She works for our sister company, Business Insider. And she was writing that as Walgreens and 7-Eleven falter, America is turning into a shopping wasteland. She explains that pharmacies should be pretty stable businesses, seeing as 7 in 10 Americans take some form of prescription medication. And that also totals up to a lot of money, over $700 billion in 2023. And folks aren't just buying drugs at pharmacies, using them as convenient stores for all sorts of other groceries, seen as one of the last places where Americans go to shop in person on a regular basis. Ms. Stewart goes on to note that despite these advantages, even pharmacy mega chains are struggling to survive in the current environment. She points to a few examples. One, Walgreens recently announcing it will be closing over 1,000 stores. That's about 14% of its physical footprint over the next 3 years, saying that 25% of its outlets weren't profitable. Rival CVS, which has shut hundreds of stores in recent years, about 10% of its stores, said it would soon cut 3,000 jobs. And last example here is another competitor, Rite Aid, closed a bunch of stores after filing for Chapter 11 late last year. So, Rajiv, we'll start with you. We're playing Blame Pie, and we've asked you to create a pie chart of reasons, 3 max, why mega pharmacies are struggling so much.
Yeah, so you gave me the option to include 3, but I think I only need 2. There's 2 really big reasons, two main categories for why this is happening, and one is on the consumer side and one is on the back end pharmacy side. So I'm assigning 70% blame to the consumer side, which has to do with
them.
which has to do with consumer buying preferences are shifting and the in-store customer experience is just getting worse. And those 2 things are kind of attached at the hip. So for one, many people are turning to online merchants for their everyday convenience items. And this has really made it difficult for pharmacy chains to turn enough of a profit at the front of the store. They're experiencing lesser foot traffic. And related to this, the customer experience is getting worse. As I mentioned, more and more products are being locked up behind glass in response to in-store theft. And we're kind of seeing how this is leading to a reduction in sales because of this unsatisfactory experience. Consumers either kind of or don't follow through with the purchase when something is locked up, or they just turn to another option. These pharmacies, you have to remember, Marcus, these pharmacies brought in a lot of foot traffic during the pandemic due to vaccines and tests being administered in drugstores.
Yep.
Also, that some of them were even offering medical services. So consumers would pick up front of the store items while getting a vaccine or a COVID test, but that's not the case anymore. Obviously, demand for those COVID-related services has significantly waned. So that's leading to lesser traffic in the front of those stores. And, when you have so many of these stores, you mentioned Walgreens and CVS and Rite Aid, so many of them are like located on top of each other in many communities across the U.S. So it's tough for all of them to be profitable. So Walgreens said about 25% of our 8,000 plus U.S. physical stores are unprofitable, and we're going to close down a bunch of them.
So wait, so 70% for the consumer and 30% for...
So 30% will be on the back end pharmacy side, and that's related to falling reimbursement rates for dispensing prescription drugs. So just to catch you up quick, pharmacies usually buy their medications from either the manufacturer directly or from a wholesaler, and then they get reimbursed by pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs. The problem is that 3 PBMs in the US handle about 80% of prescription volume.
Wow.
And they have massive influence over not only prescription drug pricing for what we, the consumers, pay, but also the different contracts among the different players in the pharmaceutical supply chain, whether that's health insurers or employers or the pharmacies that dispense the medications. The PBMs just have an enormous influence over, how those companies are rebated or how the pharmacies are reimbursed. So PBMs essentially set these reimbursement rates. And in some cases, the pharmacies actually, even the big chains, they get paid less when they dispense a medication than it costs to keep the medication in stock. So, this is a very significant operational challenge. And you might ask why pharmacies accept these lower payment rates. Well, because 3 PBMs control so much of the market, the pharmacies don't have a lot of negotiating leverage, and PBMs kind of present to them like these take it or leave it contracts. And if the pharmacies leave them, they could lose out on customers to another pharmacy where PBMs have more favorable contracts in place. So CVS, just one quick note, has a little bit of a leg up in this area because one of the big 3 PBMs is actually owned by CVS's parent company, CVS Health. So they kind of have they're on both sides of the business there.
That's Caremark, right?
Yeah, it's Caremark. Yeah. So it's affecting pharmacies though of all sizes.
So CVS has one, so that a PBM, so that helps them. Walgreens, this article is noting, they tried to push back against Express Scripts, a major PBM, to try to get more from prescriptions, and they gave in and lost about $4 billion trying to fight them. So that didn't work at all. And Douglas Hoey, the CEO of National Community Pharmacists Association, representing independent pharmacies, was saying the pharmacy really doesn't have any negotiating leverage because the PBM says, look, pharmacy, if you don't give us everything that we want, we're not going to allow patients to get their drug benefit at your pharmacy.
Yeah, these PBMs are really kind of seen as like the evil middlemen in the pharmaceutical supply chain. And it's unfortunate they have so much power because what their business practices are doing are driving up costs for patients and forcing a lot of smaller, I know we're talking about like the big pharmacy chains, but their lower reimbursement rates force a lot of these really small independent pharmacies to go out of practice.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it seems like a lot. And it's nearly a third of community pharmacies say they're considering closing, according to the recent National Community Pharmacists Association survey.
Yeah, I mean, if they can't justify the cost of dispensing these medications, what's the point of even being open for some of them? And then you get into the whole issue of like, pharmacy deserts, right? Where some areas of the country, there's not adequate enough access to a pharmacy.
Yeah. I mean, even the bigger guys are closing. Nearly 3,000 drugstores, including the big folks, have shut since 2019. It's according to Retail Stat. And there will still be a lot of pharmacies left. CVS says even after it shakes things up, 85% of Americans will still live within 10 miles of a CVS pharmacy. However, to your point about pharmacy deserts, we've talked about this number before, and I saw it cited in one of your articles recently, 40 million people. It's over 10% of Americans already live in pharmacy deserts, according to KFF Health News. Really quickly, before we move on to 7-Eleven and another flavor of convenience, aside from some of these pharmacies, we talked about, I was trying to list all the different kind of competitors that are attacking the pharmacies from different sizes. One of them is other pharmacies. As you mentioned, there is kind of just too many stores that are sitting on top of each other, too many pharmacies sitting on top of other pharmacies for them to be profitable. The other ones I've got down here, Amazon, because you were noting that Amazon Pharmacy, they're expanding same-day prescription drug delivery, generally half of the US by next year. And then also big box folks like Walmart Pharmacy customers, you were also noting in an article that they can now add prescription medication to same-day delivery orders. And so folks, as well as the sort of discount retailers, Dollar General, folks like that, where people can buy some of the groceries they would have bought inside of these pharmacies, they will get them there. So on the pharmacy side of things, it's moving online, and that is reducing the need for folks to go into the pharmacy in the first place, which reduces the need for them to buy stuff whilst they're in the store. So that's another angle that they're being attacked from.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Amazon, of course, is like the online giant here. Consumers, even just looking at medications, consumers are becoming more open to using online pharmacy services. And although this hasn't taken off, I'd say, like online sales in other industries, I think enough folks have tried like an online pharmacy at some point to kind of carve into the in-store pharmacy business a little bit. And, when we talk about like the convenience factor later, I think this is going to be where like legacy players have to go, and that's kind of ramping up their digital offerings to offset for the store closures.
Yeah, there were some numbers on how many people have tried to buy or bought prescription drugs online. 34% of Americans have used an online pharmacy to buy prescription drugs, and that includes over 60% of young people, 18 to 34-year-olds, according to M3, MI, and Kantar.
One quick note that I've found in my research, Amazon doesn't talk about their pharmacy business a lot in earnings calls, but they recently said that the worsening experience in drugstores related to like items being locked up, in cabinets and everything, that has actually led to a boost in Amazon Pharmacy's business because fewer people are going into those stores.
So we've been talking about Walgreens closing a bunch of stores. CVS has already closed a bunch of stores. Rite Aid filing for Chapter 11. And all those pharmacies, people look at them as convenience stores. But there's another convenience store which is also struggling in terms of brick and mortar, at least. Our Rachel Wolf was noting in early October that 7-Eleven will shutter nearly 450 underperforming stores, roughly 3% of its North American footprint, as it adjusts its operations to account for consumers' shifting preferences and behaviors in the convenience store category. Blake, I've asked you to create a pie chart similar to Rajiv, but a pie chart of reasons, 3 max, why 7-Eleven, another type of convenience store, is struggling.
Yeah, so we're going to transition from talking about life-saving pharmaceuticals to cigarettes and junk food. So this is more the space. It might feel a little abrupt, but it'll make sense in a moment. So I'm sorry, Marcus, I'm usually a rule follower, but I have 4 factors. I hope that's okay. So 40% is just the economy and inflation. I think right off of the bat, that's a big chunk of it, right? If you look at a lot of the big brand CPGs, their sales are struggling. A lot of the snacks and other junk foods, discretionary purchases, people are cutting back. And when they're indulging, they're probably buying them in bulk to save money from a, Costco, Target, or Walmart. And there's, the typical, mother knows best adage of, we've got plenty of food at home. Why do we need to stop off at the convenience store for, a pack of Oreos, right? And that's a big thing. That's a big part of it. I'd say another 15% is that, cigarettes are sold at state minimums to get people into the store. And that was always a major tactic for convenience stores to drive foot traffic, were cigarettes and other tobacco products. People aren't smoking as much as they used to. Tobacco usage is down in general. It's another long-term impact.
Quickly, to just support that point, because went and looked for some numbers, because I kind of surprised by that explanation, that one of that being one of the reasons. I went and looked, and steady decline of cigarette smoking in the US. In the last 10 years, the share of US adult smoking has fallen from 17% to less than 12%, according to the American Lung Association. That's about 17 million fewer smokers. Yeah, over the last 10 years.
Nicotine use has not subsided as drastically. There are a lot of, vaping, other types of smokeless alternatives that, convenience stores still use to get traffic into the store. But when you think about just the sheer percentage of Americans that were regular smokers back, in a previous generation, that has a significant impact on how a convenience store operates, right?
Yep.
The other 15% is digital. Obviously there are a lot of digital convenience options, GoPuff, Uber, DoorDash, etc. But within the food and beverage category, e-commerce penetration is still pretty low, less than 10%. So even though it is an impact, I'd still only give it about 15%. The other 30, and this is what I want to spend the most time talking about, because it's really the most important factor, is that consumers' eating habits have changed drastically over a long period of time, and a store like 7-Eleven hasn't really kept up with those trends. People are eating healthier. And when they indulge, they still do indulge, but they're looking for something a little bit higher quality than, a packaged cookie or a candy bar. So these were trends that were happening over a long period of time. And I think, the spike in inflation, people cutting back on discretionary purchases have really brought it to the surface. And that has had an outsized impact on convenience stores. But it's still something that, a company like 7-Eleven is going to have to get in front of, and they can't just wait for the economy to improve and people, being more willing to spend on, snacks and other types of junk foods. I'll give you just one example. If you're familiar with the cookie chain Crumbl. Have you heard of them? So, it's not like necessarily like a gourmet cookie, but it's a little bit more than, something that a Mrs. Fields cookie that you would get packaged in a 7-Eleven. These Crumbl cookies, they're a relatively new brand. They have 860 stores across the US.
Wow.
So they're like one of the fastest growing QSRs. And this is the type of product that 7-Eleven is now competing with, not just in, major metropolitan areas, but, across the country. So I bring that up because I just think it's a good example of consumers. Yes, they're eating healthier, but they still like to indulge, but they have more options than ever when they want to go spend that extra, $5 on something sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, and their foot traffic's down as a result of all of this. 7-Eleven traffic falling 7% in August, and it's been declining every month since Q2 of 2023. So it's been a long time now. Rachel Wolf was making that point. Part of that foot traffic issue is commuting. Folks aren't commuting as much as they were before. I went and looked. If you just Google Maps where the 7-Elevens are in New York, Philly, Boston, Chicago, they're all where people work typically. Right. So that's definitely having having an effect on them. So the question becomes, all right, so what do they do? And it seems as though 7-Eleven's strategy for the kind of new model of convenience, so to speak, is to open new stores. They're closing 450, but they recently noted they're going to be opening 500, so a similar number of new format locations across the US in the next 3 years. It's a larger store called New Standard, and they have, to what Blake was saying, not just a contemporary design, larger product assortment of improved food and beverage offerings as well as in-store restaurants. Blake, do you see this as being the new model of convenience that can work with 7-Eleven?
I think execution is going to have everything to do with it, right? I mean, they're going to need to tap into these sort of evolved consumer eating habits in order to, appeal to their audience in the long term because, in my opinion, there's a lot of sort of wasted real estate inside of these stores. I think what 7-Eleven really needs to do is leverage their consumer insights, right? So a lot of the times you're operating these stores that are serving multiple purposes. Maybe, people who are in a pinch are getting a meal there. More often they're getting their morning coffee or picking up a snack at some point during the day. Like I would imagine that what they're really going to need to focus on is running the numbers and finding out like how can we best allocate our resources and our real estate inside the store to actually cater to the people that are driving the most revenue, right?
Yeah.
So if you're dedicating a ton of money and resources to a dine-in section of the store and nobody's using it and you're not going to boost margins, and that's going to be a massive waste of real estate. And it could be something more simple to just getting rid of, the stale hot dogs that are, sitting there rotating all day and putting, something more interesting in, like like fresh cookies or something like that. Yeah. So no, I'm serious. So I think it's, paying attention to consumer trends, looking at what your customers are already doing and just iterating on that.
Yeah. Early signs seem to be positive, at least. Daily sales at the average new standard store 13% higher in the first half of this year compared to the rest of 7-Eleven's existing portfolio, Rachel was noting. Rajiv, how about for you? What does the new model of convenience look like for pharmacies going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned like the smaller format stores. I think we might see some of that. I think we already are seeing some of that for Walgreens. You need to think about like how you can ramp up your digital offerings, one-stop shop apps where like consumers can order medications and other items in one order, like we just recently saw with Walmart, as you mentioned, with same-day home delivery. So this is already happening in some cases. Like even as retail pharmacy stores close, many close, this is obviously not going to disappear, right? There's simply too much of too big of a market when you look at like the aging population and the need for medications. Older patients regularly take multiple medications. You think about like 4 of the 5 top companies in the US in terms of revenue are in the prescription drug business, except for Apple's the only one that's not. So they just kind of have to figure out how to improve the customer experience by creating some sort of like a hybrid world where consumers will be less reliant on in-store shopping, but for most it will still be an option, just mixed with that digital component.
Yeah. And it seems like maybe people won't go in as much for their prescription drugs. I mean, it's not like they're going to switch to being online all of a sudden overnight. A lot of people still do go into stores for their prescription drugs. Actually, I've got some data here from that same survey or same source, M3MI, Kantar Media, where US adults purchased their prescription medications in April, 88% in-store pharmacy versus 34% online.
Yeah, and there's a lack of awareness among many consumers of online pharmacy services, even though like a third have said that they've used it at one point. People who stick to their brick and mortar pharmacies to pick up their medications, over half of them never even heard of online pharmacy services, according to a recent survey that we recently covered. And I think there is a little bit of like a friction point issue here too, where a lot of people don't want to go through the hassle of changing their pharmacy, even if it's asking their doctor to transfer their medication to somewhere else. A lot of people just kind of stick to what they know, as long as the experience is satisfactory, and that's going to be the big advantage, I think, for these pharmacies to make sure that they're providing that good customer experience.
You also wrote a piece just noting, just to close out the episode, that grocery chain locations with in-store health clinics attract more shoppers than stores without healthcare services, according to a report from Placer.ai. So do we think that, even if people are maybe getting their prescriptions online a bit more, they're still going to turn to those pharmacies, to those grocery locations for health clinic related services?
Yeah, and I mean, on the clinic side, that's really been like the whole strategic plan for in-store health clinics, whether they're in retail pharmacies or within grocery stores. It's kind of operating them as a loss leader to try to attract foot traffic for other parts of the business. It hasn't worked at all on the retail pharmacy side. Walgreens is pretty much saying we're out of the primary care world. CVS is not that far removed, but they're not exactly profiting from their primary care investments. So I think like the medical care inside pharmacy store or inside grocery store has not really worked. But again, I think we're just going to see a mix of these pharmacy chains that just had too many stores open, just have to right size their business and make sure that the ones that they do keep open are, delivering what consumers want.
What's interesting, though, is that our numbers are still quite high in terms of the number of Americans we think will visit a retail clinic at least once. We think a third of Americans will visit a retail clinic at least once. That's like CVS Minute clinics, Walgreens healthcare clinics, etc. So that number isn't going down, even though it seems like pharmacies and grocery stores are saying that this isn't a strategy that is working for us thus far. Do you think
it's funny though? Yeah, no, I was just going to say we actually just finished our updated retail clinic forecast. I think that we are projecting a slowdown.
Oh, interesting.
In retail clinic patients. But you're right. There, there's still going to be a bunch of people who do get a COVID shot or a flu shot there. But during the pandemic, they were getting comfortable with getting a vaccine there. So they're actually going there for other medical services like, low acuity type issues, common illnesses and infections. Yeah. But I think that that's not happening as much as it was in the peak of the pandemic.
Yeah. And in part because it's so hard for them to get an appointment with their primary care. And so they're turning to them for that reason, as we've spoken about in the past. I'll end with this from the Insider article from Ms. Stewart. She was saying, it seems strange to mourn the demise of corporate giants like Walgreens and 7-Eleven. These, after all, are the very corporations that help decimate local businesses from the friendly neighborhood pharmacy to the five and dime. But their passing feels like it marks yet another transitional moment in American culture, as the entire concept of running out to the store for a minute goes the way of music on MTV and the landline. What does it mean to have so few places left to grab the things we need? Ends today's episode. Thank you, gents, so much for hanging out with me today. Really appreciate it. Thank you to Rajiv.
Thanks, Marcus. Happy to be here.
Yes, sir. Thank you to Blake.
Yeah, good to be here.
Thank you to Victoria, who edits the show. Stuart, who runs the team and suggests topics. Sophie, who does our social media. And thanks to everyone for listening in. We hope to see you tomorrow for Behind the Numbers Weekly Listen, an eMarketer podcast made possible by TikTok. On November 1st, eMarketer is hosting a virtual summit. You can learn all about the top trends of 2025 with a keynote from analysts Sarah Malzano and Evelyn Mitchell-Wolfe, panels hosted by analysts Kelsey Voss and Yuri Wormser, and featuring executives from top brands. All of this starts at 11:30 a.m. Eastern on November 1st and is hosted by eMarketer's Vice President of Content, Susie David Canyon, and Senior Director of Client Briefings, Jeremy Goldman. Use the link in the show notes to register today.